Hello, every folks, and good morning! Welcome to another edition of Know Your Unit. Today we are talking about the Knight Commander, aka the reason that you really don't hear about the Ranger and Paladin that often. So, what's the deal with this unit? Well, they're essentially going to be a interesting combination of a lot of different classes to make a fun little absolute monster over here of well, absolute Mary Sue proportions. So let's go ahead and get into this right from the usual get-go here. So, weapon access-wise, they've got access to daggers, swords, two-handed swords, hammers, whips, and crossbows. It should be mentioned that when it comes to the whips, they do have access to their unique finisher here through Demon Rose, which is going to be a ice element finisher here that has a guaranteed chance to charm, which is all well and good, but at the same time you can do far more dumb builds on her, and you know that's exactly what we like to do around here. So, if we decide to go over here and go ahead and go for Dragonfang Lombardia, we can always go for something along the lines of Sword and Dagger, which is a nice little combination of different pieces of equipment here. We get the counter poison effect off of all of this. We still retain a parry effect over there, though realistically I'm not even sure this one needs much of a parry, because like I mentioned earlier, she is coming in with a combination of skills that you really don't see that often. She's actually got the best defensive skill in the game here, courtesy of Ivory Tower, meaning that with one or two skill cards, she, functionally speaking, can outright delete 3 physical attacks per turn. This is the same thing that the Matriarch gets, but the one feature of this ability that oftentimes gets overlooked is that when we're combining with Intercession here, it should be noted that when it comes to like Intercession or Ivory Tower or anything like that, they function differently. So something like Intercession or Evade will give you a physical like armor tick that will eat one of those hits when it ends up coming your way, whether it's physical or magical, right? So in the case of something like Ivory Tower, it's essentially an ability that allows you to still use items, to still use other things on top of it, because it counts as an activated skill. So it's basically the same thing as something like Mind's Eye, except that it works for all physical type attacks, which basically means that it will completely nullify 3 of those things without potentially interfering with stuff like items. And this is especially good once you get into the later portions of the game, wherein effectively this is a move that's just slightly above Phalanx in terms of utter tanking ability, because it's very rare that you'll get attacked more than 3 times per round. And in her particular case, she can just keep renewing this every round. It's, again, the same thing that makes the Patriarch so dang good, but now she's got it on a frontliner. She's also got Intercession, in case you're worried about casters. She's got First Aid over here, just to kind of flex on Vice. It's the same version that he gets, not the kind that Denim gets. It would be even more overpowered in her hands. She gets access to Gorgon Key and Shadow Break, which is just kind of funny. Shadow Break you'll almost never run into. Shadows dispel within 3 rounds. I don't know why the hell you'd ever use this. They could make it free and it would be a waste of a slot. But when it comes to Gorgon Key, that could potentially be useful. But you might be saying, wait a minute, I also see Intimidate on that list. What gives? Why would you ever use Gorgon Key with that? Well, technically you can choose to activate your Gorgon Key and then attack, so in some situations it might be better, though admittedly, yes, in most cases Intimidate will be a nice catch-all for a lot of those abilities. So she, unlike something like many of the other units there, will be coming in with a combination of Intimidate and Ivory Tower, very similar to the Paladin with the Intimidate Phalanx combo. But in her particular case, she's going to be coming in quite a decent ways earlier, being somebody that you can recruit in Chapter 4, as opposed to being recruitable only in Code 3 for the Paladin there. Additionally, if you want to guarantee debuffs on weapons, you've got your Mighty Strike. You've also got Beast Slayer and Dragon Slayer for their respective combinations. And it should be noted that as far as those weapon categories are concerned, she gets the entirety of daggers, swords, two-handers, but she only gets the Caldia for the hammers, as well as all of the whips, as well as all variants of crossbows, meaning that she's potentially a fantastic heavy dragoon with a crossbow if you'd prefer. While this isn't exactly something to write home about that much, due to the fact that she comes in with a decent advantage on her stats and things, potentially she might be one of your better snipers in the earlier parts of the game there. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue on here. So as far as her weapon combinations go, they can be fairly wide. There's a lot of things that you can do with the double attack combination, though realistically speaking, I kind of feel that when it comes to Ivory Tower and skills like that, in many cases you never want to get rid of Ivory Tower. In most cases you want to be running something like a Beast Slayer, Beast Slayer or Intimidate or something like that. There's a lot of ways that you could potentially do this. Double Attack is actually her entire class here. Is one of the few cases of a double attack build that may actually be worth it. In the case of, let's say, something like a Dragon Fang situation here, though realistically speaking, you're potentially better off doing something like this, going defensive with it, potentially just going for that Mighty Impact instead. Essentially just having finishers, Mighty Impact, Ivory Tower, Concentration. This allows for potentially casting Poison Clouds with a chance to hit. I will say, though, Concentration, like, you may notice, I'm trying to build around Concentration in this particular case. It is almost uniquely worthless in her hands. So, Concentration, in the case of, let's say, something like the Valkyrie, still had an opportunity because they had several weapons that had access to spell or debuff type abilities, in the form of, let's say, something like the Dark Spear, where realistically, yeah, 3 uses of Paralytic Wave, it's worth, maybe potentially working that in. In her case, she has, as far as I can tell, a grand total of two abilities whatsoever that can take advantage of Concentration, which are 1 use of Charm and 1 use of Poison Cloud. That's not very impressive. So, as a bit of a other note here, something that you may want to consider is pretty much anything that will combine with the Lombardia. While there's a lot of different weapons that could potentially be good in her hands, being able to counter is a very useful tool. So potentially just something worth considering there. And if you're going for expanding options, there's nothing wrong with, like, let's say, Aracian and Lombardia. That's going to be a pretty solid combination. It's going to be a nice, reliable source of absolutely everything. And additionally, we can just go ahead and swap out for the double attack here. Now, in most cases, I would say double attack isn't worth it, especially with heavy weapons. However, it's worth noting that you may notice right here, compared with Tammuz, she's actually way faster despite having 2 swords. And even when she ends up swinging them, she still will be reasonably tough there, so what gives? Well, she's actually one of the fastest units, I believe possibly the fastest unit in the game. Being one of those ones that's not only ridiculously fast, not only ridiculously strong, comes with a lot of broken abilities. She's effectively the second most broken character next to Denim in many ways. It's kind of by design there. So just about anything you put on her will, well, be kind of ridiculous, to be fair there. She's a unit that's fairly easy to recruit, all things considered. It actually, like, in many cases it may seem like a bit of an intimidating thing, but she actually is pretty easy to recruit, all things considered. All you have to do is you have to be on Law, you recruit Hobram, and you bring him along to their meeting at the castle. You just basically use Hobram as soon as you get him, right? And then at that point, all you really have to do, if I can remember where the AI button is, because I keep forgetting that I want to turn the AI on. As soon as you end up recruiting Hobram, you just end up using him, and then as soon as Chapter 4 starts, you remember to read the report that says that there's a rift in the Dark Nights. Then you do your usual, go up to the castle, go to the volcano, then you go down to Chrysero, and there you go, there's the fight. All you gotta do is get both her and the other commander to 50%, and then as soon as he's knocked out of the fight, you get her down to critical and you're done. This is actually a lot easier to do in this version than it was in previous versions, because criticals are more locked down, which means that you're far less likely to accidentally crit her at the last second. Granted, in older versions you would typically just cherry tap her down with magic, but unfortunately she also is very resistant to it, so a bit of a give and take. Personally, I found it a lot easier to recruit her in this version, but either way, it's up to you. Your mileage may vary. Just remember, the important part that gets a lot of people tripped up, you want to read that Rift in the Dark Nights report before you go to the volcano. You don't piss off the volcano. Read the damn report. Mostly because that's when the cutscene triggers, and if the cutscene doesn't trigger, she's no longer wandering around in, Chrysero with Volak over there, you know? Okay, so that's kind of about that. I mean, she's kind of overpowered by design. Funnily enough, her whole shtick here is that in many ways she ends up being a bit of a punishing unit to use, because sometimes folks will end up over-reliant on her. Again, far less so in this version. For context, in the PSP version, the kind of go-to with her whole thing was to go give her 2 icebergs, and then just switch her over to Ninja, then realize that you don't have a Knight Commander mark. So then you go and you look up a guide on where to find a Knight Commander mark, then you realize that all of those boss fights are really far away, but then you realize that you can exercise some Templars that show up in the late game when going through one random battle in the northern end of the map. So you try to get those to spawn for ages, then you realize killing them doesn't do it, and you specifically have to steal from them, but then you realize that you have to have a specific rank of steal in order to be able to get those marks, so you're kind of just realizing by that point that it's just a sunk cost fallacy, and you kind of just wanted to go back and do those bosses, but at this point you've already come this far, you might as well. So you're sitting there ranking up this skill that completely doesn't want to rank up for absolutely ages, until finally you end up getting a hold of this stupid class mark, at which point then you realize you forgot to pick up double attack from the ninja, so then you convert her back, then you reload your save, because then you realize, oh shoot, I don't have a Knight Commander mark again, then you realize this was before the grind. Anyway, there's no personal experience on this, I don't know what you're talking about, but anyway, eventually you get the double attack over from the ninja after you eventually end up killing one of your other ninjas, and then just having her scavenge the dead body. PSP mechanics got a little bit weird as far as skills went. Anyway, so the kind of go-to in her case, due to the fact that she came in with rank 4 Aug Ice at that point, was dual icebergs, dual swords. She more or less would carve through armor like complete butter. In many cases it was assumed it was because her stats were crazy high, when in reality it was her Aug ranks just basically bypassing defenses like they didn't exist. And additionally, this meant that rather than using whips, you were in many cases better off just using Cherry Ronde to one-shot everything. Now, that being said, this time around, it's interesting because her whip finisher is very, very good. That Guaranteed Charm is definitely worth using, but it's kind of interesting that you can still do the old sword setup, courtesy of the old Cherry Ronde still being good against air thing. Meaning that potentially you can run many of her old builds at the same time. Now, one unfortunate thing, and I can understand why this was the case, because for the longest time I was wondering why the Supple Whip became a two-handed whip in this version, but having her running around with, like, double attack with a Supple Whip and swords would give her kind of ridiculous coverage. I mean, granted, I guarantee that's not the main reason for it, but basically whip plus any other one-handed weapon is really, really exceptionally good. So, yeah, I can kind of see why that didn't end up making a comeback in this version. Simply put, it would kind of be a dead brain option, because, Supple Whip used to be one-handed, for those that didn't know. Instead, it was given a curse effect, and became two-handed, but yeah, it would be a complete no-brainer in this one. Anyway, so that is kind of about that on this report on the Knight Commander. Yeah, use them if you got them, I guess. You really can't go wrong shoving them into whatever part of the team you'd like. Actually, one funny note is that they have access to a lot of, well, the standard missile and overhead spells, as well as a heal. But funnily enough, they don't actually get access to the Draconics that they have access to back in PSP. Or not in PSP, that's the boss versions have access to. What am I saying? Sorry. If you might notice, my talking's a little funny, my nose is a bit funny. I got a frickin' cold on top of already being tired, so brain's fuzzier than usual. Thank y'all for sticking by this monstrosity. Anyway, what else? Oh yeah, her whole class setup, interestingly enough, at least back on PSP, which was very similar to how it was here, is actually very, very, very similar to how the boss units look if you were to cheat them into the game. And I've heard some folks mention that they basically will use the same loadout, give or take, where it just has most of the skills on there, but not quite all of them, minus the immunities and stuff like that. So, there we go. That's about that. So, y'all have yourselves a good one. Thank you for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one, which should be on either White Knights or Dragons. We'll see. Alright, later.